What's up, guys, and welcome back to Monink. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Heya! How you doing? For today's video, I sat down in conversation with the man behind the Twitter and Facebook accounts known as Classical Studies Memes for Hellenistic Teens. So yes, I sat down with Ben today, who is a long-time internet friend of mine. We met on Twitter and have chatted for the last 2 years, I think. So it's been a very long time coming to sit down and to chat with him, all about his experience as being a secondary school teacher of classics in New Zealand, which is where he's from. And also we chatted a lot about what it was like to grow on social media and about the impacts that that has as well to the subject of classics, as well as Ben himself and what it's like to be the person behind such a big account that discusses such educational topics in a different and fun way, shall we say, through Ben's memes. So I'd like to start off by thanking Ben for taking the time out of his weekend to do this chat, because the time difference is quite brutal between me and Ben. It is actually 13-hour difference between London and New Zealand. So we had to find a time that worked for both of us and a day that worked for both of us. So it was like 7 in the morning for me and it was 8 p.m. for Ben. So thank you so much for doing that and for coordinating this with me. And I hope you guys really enjoyed this chat, because I thoroughly enjoyed racking Ben's brain. So let's just roll into the video. Well, for a first question, Ben, to get you sort of rolling into this, and because I'm always curious about context of people, what is your classics journey? So how did that start and how did you end up where you are?
It's a good question. It's something of an odyssey in and of itself. No, I guess I started way back over 20 years ago now, which makes me feel very old. I started learning Latin at school, probably in year 7, just a little bit, but properly in year 9. I have no idea what that is in other people's grades and things, but I was basically like 11 at the time. So I was really lucky because in New Zealand, very few schools still taught Latin 20 years ago. You can't teach it at all anymore, but that's another story. I'll get to that. I learned Latin all through high school, and that's what first really got me started into the ancient world. Through that, it was in my first full year of Latin when the film Troy came out, and we went on a class trip to go and watch it. Um, and it got worse from there. But no, and then in New Zealand we have classical studies in schools, and I did that towards the end of my time at school. And I went to university. I did a law degree and I did an arts degree in Latin as my major, and did some other papers in classics and other various languages and things like that. Then I practiced law for a while because, that's what you do. But I realized along the way that my real passion was in Latin and classics and the ancient world and teaching. So I switched over to teaching a few years into my practice. And since then, I trained to teach Latin primarily, but also classics. And I've been teaching classics ever since. And I taught Latin for 3 years, and then our government was like, no more Latin for you ever again at all in the country. So that was a bit of a blow to all of us here. But I'm still teaching classics, and somewhere along the lines in there, when I first started teaching, I thought, hey, what would be really funny if I made like a little Facebook page to share some funny memes that I have. And now it's got like 400,000 followers, and Twitter is like 470 and growing. And so that's kind of where I've got to with all of that now.
Well, studying law, let's go back to that for a second.
I know it's a long answer, sorry.
No.
I told you it was an odyssey.
That's great. I love long answers, but studying law is so different to studying classics. I imagine, because I haven't done law. So were there any similarities that you found you could transfer over, or did you like that they were so different?
As a discipline, being one of reading and writing and studying and all of that, they worked quite well together. I mean, and particularly for me, I've always been into languages. Obviously, doing Latin. I also did French at school, and while I was at university, I did a little bit of Italian and Spanish and German because it's pretty easy once you've once you've mastered Latin, you can pretty much do anything else. So writing, all of that stuff was really sort of straightforward for me. So in many ways, I think the law stuff felt similar, but the reality of it was that was the hard, boring stuff, and learning Latin was just fun, and that's why I really just had this great passion for it, because I sort of realized one day I was like, why am I doing this sort of boring, annoying thing with horrible people? The lawyers, I mean, not the criminals. No. Why was I doing that when I really loved teaching? And I tutored school kids while I was studying to like earn money to live, and that was the most fun that I had. So I was like, why can't I do that for a job?
That's really interesting, though, that you would say the Latin was the fun part and the law was the boring part. Because I think lots of people would assume it would be the other way, with like the reputation that Latin has.
People who haven't done law degrees, I think.
So what was it about the Latin that was fun for you? Was it like the puzzle element, the history element, the...
Oh, I mean, if you're one of those people that really likes Latin, you love Latin. But you're right. It did have that sort of feeling like a puzzle, where it's like words and word games and puzzles and all that sort of stuff. But it was also the real joy, and I must say this is something that I would impress upon anyone, and I always try to. The real joy of studying any ancient language is being able to read something in the language it was written thousands of years ago and be like, wow, that was really cool. And just sort of, yeah, just have that same like feeling of connectedness to the past. So the cool part about the Latin was exploring all these wonderful writers and the stuff that they wrote. Some of it was extremely funny, like satires, and then the tragedies, and I mean, I'm a big fan of epic poetry, so all of that was great as well. But yeah, it was a great variety. It was a small class, so we knew everyone, got along really well. I had a fantastic lecturer who he was just old as the hills and knew everything about everything, Greek and Latin, and he'd just launch off into any story about anything at any point in time, and just absolutely fantastic. So yeah, it was just everything that I enjoyed doing.
So then, coming back to you again, because I have a lot of questions, coming back to, though, you saying that in New Zealand you now can't teach Latin. So I didn't know about this. So I'm curious about that, like what happened there, but also to tack onto that, like how do you then teach ancient history and classics without being able to teach the language?
Right, good question. So yeah, beginning of or some point during 2020, so they sprung this on us during a lockdown. The government said we're redesigning our curriculum, and in New Zealand there is one sort of core curriculum, and that's pretty much that's the only way you can do things. We have some external exam providers and things like that, but it's very rarely done in anything but private schools. So they said basically the system is that we have 3 levels of senior school examinations. So level 1, level 2, and level 3. They are amazingly good at naming things. And they said, so we had classics at level 1, 2, and 3, and Latin at level 1, 2, and 3. They said we're cutting all of Latin. So no more exams whatsoever, no anything. You can't earn any credits for it. You can't get anything towards university. And for classics, they're cutting it from level 1, so you could only do it at level 2 and 3. So out of our sort of 6-year level groups, they cut 4 of them, just straight like that. And they said, this is what we're doing. And if you want to have a say about it, send us a message. But it was pretty clear that's what we're going to do. We drummed up a huge campaign around the world. We had people writing in from the UK, from America, from everywhere that anyone's ever learned Latin. And of something there were like 4,000 submissions to the government across the whole range of all the changes to all the subjects, and about 60% of them were just about not cutting Latin. And they just did it anyway because they just wanted to save money. Unfortunately, what it really came down to is the fact that in New Zealand, we got hit by the the neoliberal bug in the 1980s, and people just switched off to Latin as being elitist and only for private schools and that sort of thing. And so it became a self-fulfilling prophecy that because they wouldn't teach it in public schools, it just went to private schools, and they were the only ones that then got to teach it. So hardly anyone got to learn it, and it just became a spiral. So that the numbers were so low, the government said, it's just a money thing. And at the end of the day, that's all it was. So so in reality, schools are able to teach Latin if they want to, but they can't examine it, and you can't gain any credits towards it, which is all anyone cares about in setting a school subject. So there's one or two schools which are still doing it and still holding on to it, but it feels very much like a losing battle now.
God.
But on to your question about classics. So we've had the two separate disciplines for quite a long time. So right through the 1990s, I think even back to the 1980s, classical studies in New Zealand has been a really, really strong secondary school course. Basically, a whole bunch of teachers got down and sort of wrote this course back before our current even system was in place. And they had these kind of like core topics that everyone taught and everyone knew, and they were set topics, and they had all these wonderful things and exams and everything like that. And people would do like 6 different topics a year. It was amazing. And then the new system came in, and it was all a bit, let everyone have a bit of choice, which was cool because you didn't have to be prescribed about it, but everyone kind of still did the same topics anyway. And then it got a bit sort of wishy-washy. Anyway, it's always been in translation. So it's a combination of literature, but also history, mythology, art, all of those things combined. So we had, the classics topics that you would have. You would have an art one, so you might do Roman or Greek sculpture and architecture. You might do Greek vases. You might do history topics, so Alexander or Caesar or Augustus, something like that. And then you would do a literature one, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, the Iliad, if you're lucky. And those sorts of were just the big sort of standard topics because they were something to get the kids in at school and really grapple them into it. And it was immensely popular. And still is. They've sort of just shaken everything up a bit and made life harder for us.
So I'm curious because I ask teachers all of this because I don't see my audience. So you're standing right in front of your students. You get to see what resonates with them and discussing all of those topics. Is there one that resonates with them when you get to it that lots of students really enjoy? Or is it really very different and very diverse and depends on the year and the class? Or is there one that always hits?
Well, a bit of both. Absolutely, there are year groups and cohorts and even classes that favor one thing over another. Kids are a bit turned off Greek vases these days. It's a bit boring. Or look, it's another pot sort of thing. But mythology, anything with mythology really gets people interested in it. And I'm a big believer in the modern adaptations and the Percy Jacksons and all that sort of stuff as a gateway to getting kids interested in classics and learning all about that. And I will push back on anyone who really, says, oh, it's all rubbish, it's all made up and that sort of thing. I think it's a really great way because so many of my kids come into class and they say, I learned about all this mythology growing up, or this is the stories based on that, and they say, oh, it was. But then I also say, okay, if anyone mentions Percy Jackson again, they say, oh, was that like no? So the mythology stuff grasps them in, but then they run with lots of things. I always find the literature, like especially the Odyssey, that's a really great one to read with the kids. We don't read the whole thing, but we pick out the best stuff. That one gets them in. Yeah, but it very much can be personal preference. And some kids are really good with the art, and some are good with the literature, and some are good with the history, which means that you do get a good range, and it allows different students to shine in different ways. And that's why it's a popular course.
Now, getting people into ancient history and classics is something that you are somewhat of an expert in with your memes, which obviously we have to talk about, because as you said, you are just shy of 1 million people on just Facebook and Twitter alone. So including Instagram, I think that pushes you over because you are just under 1 million with just those two. which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, it's definitely getting close. It's definitely getting close. I think it's about 900,000.
Oh, sorry, it's just 900,000.
You'll hear it when we get the 1 million mark. It's mind blowing.
So, does it compute for you that you are engaging people in classics when you do that? Because all of your memes are obviously geared towards that. Or, like, how does that feel when you're like, there's that many people looking at my silly memes that, like, make fun of something or.
Yes. So, I mean, I think a lot about it, obviously. It's been quite an interesting journey for me because I did start out as it just being for like high school kids in New Zealand learning about classics. Like, here's some sort of like quite specific content to the stuff that even we were learning about in my class, let alone. And it speaks to how long actually it's been going that it started out on Facebook, which is like none of the kids are using Facebook anymore. Um, and when I tell kids I'm on Twitter, they're like, "What's that?" It's not. Are you on TikTok? But I do think a lot about this persona or this account or this persona that I've made and the role that it can have, because it runs a very difficult line, and I do think about this a lot because it affects the way that I choose my content, essentially. Because on the one hand, it's comedy, and if you want people to laugh at a joke, they have to get it, right? But on the other hand, I do want it to be educational because I'm an educator, I'm a teacher at heart, and so you want to like have something that people are going to get out of it. So that's quite a hard thing to do at the end of the day, to be like, here's something that you should be able to get the joke for, but also I want you to be able to learn something about it. And I'm not a fan of being like, here's like just post the joke and then write like a long description of it underneath. I just like having to explain a joke is the worst thing in the world. So I'm always kind of, I vary the content in that way. So there are some jokes which you'll find that are sort of what I call lowest common denominator. It's like, what does your average Joe on the street know about the ancient world? They'll know like Roman numeral jokes, they'll know Caesar salad jokes, they'll know, like really, really basic stuff. They'll know like Pandora's box, like a phrase or a thing that people generally get the idea of as a gateway, like we say, to then drawing them in. And then I find, and I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I followed you because I like this post about whatever. And then whenever you post your memes and I don't understand them, I Google them and I learn about it. And then I laugh at the next one. And I'm like, success. So, look, I mean, I don't run the account to be educational. At the end of the day, I do run it to be humorous and funny and whatever. It's genuinely just whatever I find funny, and I find that deeply gratifying that other people do. But I do like to have a little bit of variety in there, and I've certainly changed, modified, and adapted that over the years.
And do you feel pressure with that many eyeballs on you with your jokes? Because, as you've said that, like, some of them have to be a little bit more niche, like, you don't explain them, but I've seen other people in the comments who'll be like, I didn't get this. And then somebody will explain it. And I love going through the comments on your memes because I'm like, who got it and who needs the explanation and all of this? But because there are so many people, like, do you feel pressure to keep posting a certain amount and to keep posting a certain amount of specific memes as well?
Yeah, well, one of the funny things about social media is that if you run like any amount of content, and I'm sure you probably know this, but like you start to think in algorithms and you start to think about like, engagement and all that sort of thing. And the ironic thing is that if you post something and people don't get it, it doesn't get any traction, which means people don't see it. So at the end of the day, what most people see are the ones that people enjoy and people like. So there's kind of like it goes a bit of both ways in that sense. So the people who get most of the jokes, they're going to be seeing more of the content. That's how I think about it. And the people who get, one or two, they'll see the really popular ones that are kind of circulating around. And you look at an account like mine, like Twitter, for example, it's got 450,000 followers, but like how many of those are ever going to see one of my memes? Like even the people who actually follow me, it's a fraction of that. But then if you post something that it goes viral, then it will be seen by millions of people who aren't following me, and it's kind of a strange experience in that way. And I found recently that a lot of posts that get really big numbers are just memes that are essentially here's a post from Tumblr, screenshotted and post. It's funny and it's great, but it's like there's something about that format that people on Twitter go, oh, I really like that, and I can share that around and that sort of thing. Whereas if it's a picture with a couple of words on it, it's kind of instant to get it or not, and the engagement's a bit less on that. So it can cut both ways. But like I say, you just start to think in algorithms. But I don't feel like pressured as much. Like once the numbers reached about 10,000, it became inconceivable to me. As a number of people, I can't imagine 400,000 people looking at a screen at the same time. It's just something you can't quantify at that point. But I am driven a lot by analytics, and I look at, I modify what I do and what I post and all that sort of thing to a degree, based on that. And other times I just post something because I think it's funny, and that at the end of the day has worked for me, so I stick with it.
Now, you also took a break from Twitter, so I kind of want to talk a little bit about that, because I think that social media is such an interesting topic anyways, and obviously combining that with classics means that I can talk about it on my channel, because that's what I talk about. But also the pressure that it had, not in the way of posting memes, but the pressure of like eyes and algorithms and all of that sort of stuff that plays into it then. And you took a break. So what happened there, if you don't mind talking about it, and why you wanted to step back?
It's a great question, and I really keep meaning to write something about it, and I'll put pen to paper at some point in time. But yeah, it can at times become a little much. And it was for me when I noticed that I was doing things not because I wanted to be doing it, because I felt like I had to. And that's something that kind of hits you sometimes, and you think, oh God, do I want to be doing this? Do I enjoy doing this? Because after a point, I also began to think, what's the end goal of this? Like, where does this end? Where does it stop? Where does it go to? That sort of thing. And social media is, as an educator who works with teenagers, there's a lot of downs and a lot of ups. So I'm always mindful of the effect that it has on me and it has on other people. And I feel that if I'm doing what I want to do and I'm helping people and people are enjoying it, then I'm still being a positive role in the world. But if it's not for me, then that will be the day that I step back. But when I did take a break, I took that time to kind of get all of that out of the system, and I did find that there was a part of me that missed it and missed the fun and the enjoyment, and in many ways, actually just the camaraderie and the interaction, and especially on Twitter, there's a wonderful community of people on there who I really enjoy interacting with. One of the things that I'm particular about in running the account is I read all the comments that people write on things. On Twitter, especially, Facebook is a bit hard because their UI is just atrocious. But on Twitter, you can at least see all the comments until about like 2 weeks ago when it just completely broke, and now I can't see them. So that's great. But I like to feel like I'm sort of a part of that community as well, and it helps. And I found much more on Facebook early on that it allowed me to take a role of also moderating the community and removing the sort of elements that we didn't want in it. But that's kind of another point. So if I'm feeling good about it and I'm feeling happy about it and it's making a positive difference, I think that's still a good thing.
But with an audience that big, isn't it very difficult? Because like with my audience, I'm much smaller, obviously. Like on YouTube, when this comes out
At the moment.
well, I have like 8,000 subscribers. So if I see a bad egg, it's very easy for me to go, okay, bad egg, we don't like that, all of this. But, you get a lot of, like, so many comments, you have so many eyes. So how can you keep track of that? Like, that just sounds like a full-time job in of itself.
Well, it helps that I'm just constantly online. So no, but that's the really good point, because I have a strategy for that, which is that every now and then you just post the juiciest kind of big bit of bait for these people to they just out themselves so easily. They just can't help it. They just can't help but just bite. You just hook, line, and sinker them in. And so it's really, really easy because they can't help but comment something and then it's just block. The one good thing about Facebook, I will say this, is that they have a function on there which is it's a one tap button, which is delete comment and block user. And that's just wonderful because you just go bang, gone, and what they wrote is gone as well. Twitter, it's much more annoying because you can't delete the comment, you can hide it, but that kind of makes it worse. And so, other people sort of start engaging with trolls, and I'm like, oh, you're not helping here. No one's ever changed a troll's mind, but they're not going to be around later on because I've already blocked them and moved on. So so there are definitely ways to kind of draw them in and siphon them off, I suppose.
And you said when you started the account that it was, just for students in New Zealand and other teachers maybe as well to see it and all of this. And something that you said to Liv, because you were on Myths Baby last year, was it? I think.
Some time ago.
I think it was last year.
Yeah, maybe 21.
Oh, I remember listening to it when it came out, and then I re-listened to it recently as well because I was like, I don't want to make these exactly the same chat. But something that you said to her was that you also packaged the memes as well for the Iliad and for the Odyssey to help your students. So I was wondering what that process was like. How long did that take, and what made you think of doing that?
Well, that's a funny question, actually. One of the funny things that people always find, and I tell them, is that I hardly use any memes as a teacher, because my kids just think they suck. I am the lamest person in the world, honestly. Like, because I'm a sort of a comic sort of person, I sometimes my classroom can be a bit of a, like, here's a testing ground for a bit of like stand-up sort of thing. Not quite, but like I'm always trying out new material, appropriate material, obviously. No, so in class, I'm always trying to sort of put out my sort of style of humor, that sort of thing. But they don't go for it. it's yeah, they don't like it. And so I don't push too hard on that. But it was, I think it was the end of 2020. It actually started on Twitter, and it must have been like we got to 100,000 followers or 200,000 or something like that. I did like a voter poll on like a competition to like what should we do to celebrate it, and everyone wanted to do like, oh, it's like summarize the Odyssey in memes, and I was like, okay, I'll start doing that. And then like the Iliad, and I thought, oh, it'll be a fun sort of easy thing to do. And then like 3 months later, I'd made like 300 and something memes, and there's like 24 books of them, each with like 12 to 15 memes. And it was just like, it was the most monumental thing I've ever done. And at the end of it, I was like, I don't want to see another meme ever again. Not quite, but it was also really difficult to share on Twitter because Twitter threads, very bad, all that sort of thing. So eventually I made them into posters, which I've sort of shared, and people can buy them if they really want to. But it's kind of a difficult thing to actually sort of put out there. But yes, so basically I have retold the entire Iliad in a series of over 300 memes. I then started trying to do the Odyssey, and that was kind of at the point where things started to get a bit much for me because I sort of felt like I was just kind of doing it because I had to, and it had all these sort of stresses and pressures and that sort of thing. And I sort of took a step back from there. So it's on the back burner at the moment for the Odyssey, but it's maybe something that I get to eventually. I prefer the spontaneity of memes. You come across something and then it's funny at the time. Whenever I read the Odyssey in class, we're always just cracking jokes at whatever happens. Like, some of the stuff in that is so unintentionally funny. Like, so unintentionally funny. One of my favorite moments, and I remember this now, is there's when Odysseus is disguised as a beggar and he's in the hall and the suitors are being mean to him. One of them throws a cow hoof at him, and he ducks it, and it's the, like, Matrix, and like it hits the wall behind him. Anyway, and then like when the murder time is happening, the cowman, Phoetius, he like picks up a spear and kills that guy, and he's like, that's for throwing a cow, they're my thing. And it's just like, he cares so much about cows.
There are just so many memeable moments in Homer that I find in the Iliad as well, because when I was rereading it for my series, that was like the 5th time I've read it, maybe, like from cover to cover. Like I have oftentimes gone in, but I haven't sat down and read cover to cover like that.
Different stories, different experience.
It's totally different experience to read it all in one go. And there was so many times I was underlining things going, I'm sorry, what? Like, what is going on? And I was like, I've got to mention this because people need to know.
And there's about like 30% of the book, there are great moments to make into memes, but the other 70% is it's hard graft, I'll tell you that.
I can't even imagine doing that. I can't even imagine.
Well, you can always see the poster. No, I'm not going to do a pitch. But yeah, also like one of the other things that's sort of strange with my work is that the classes that I teach and the subjects, the topics that I teach sort of change every now and then depending on where I am, what I'm doing. So, I've taught the Odyssey quite a lot. Haven't got to teach the Iliad yet. I used to teach the Aeneid a lot. It comes and goes sort of thing. So sometimes I do it like while I'm doing it, and other times I'm like, I'm in too deep. I don't need any more Odyssey in my life. But yeah, I'd say about 50% of the memes I will make are ones that crop up out of like something that I've talked about or discussed or taught in class, and the other 50% is like there's a new format and I'm sort of applying it to something, and that's kind of how memes work and how they kind of keep current, because the content of classics doesn't really change. Like we're not really adding anything new to it as such. Not that, like, in the general sort of canon, obviously there's lots of small things that we could do more to spread knowledge about, but like it's the style of the memes that can change as well. So it's there's a bit of both.
But I mean I agree with that entirely, but I think that that's something that's so appealing about the subject, that it doesn't change. So you can look at the same thing in so many different ways, but the actual content of what happened, at least what survives to us, obviously because there are narrators and we have to trust them or whatever, then
we would love to discover a whole lot more ancient texts.
I mean, that would be great. That changes a lot of our views of anything. But yeah, the content doesn't change, and that's what I always loved about it, that I was like, I at least know, according to this person, these are the beats of the story. So if I want to interpret that differently, which I guess now you kind of have to do, because I guess like in a classroom setting, I mean, because when you're with students, they are so well connected to the internet, and so they are so well connected to what's going on in the world, that if you're discussing something from the ancient world that is concrete from what survives to us, they might then draw in different things, and they might say, oh, this reminds me of this, and this reminds me of this. How do you handle that conversation in the classroom?
Yeah, well, it's great because there's nothing worse than putting up a PowerPoint and you've got like a joke from last year, which absolutely is no longer funny because it was like not a topic, not topical at all. It does take a bit of revisiting, revising. That's why I have, like, obviously digital, I create PowerPoints and all of that sort of stuff to go with it. But a lot of the discussion and a lot of the I guess the referencing and stuff that I do is completely spontaneous, which which is one reason why I don't really use memes very much, because they can get old. In my way, I try to keep up with as much as possible whatever is happening in the world of youth today, because it is relatable to them and it helps them learn. And that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. But that is what really helps me. It goes both ways, but essentially being involved in social media allows me to keep in touch with current trends and all that sort of thing.
Well, that's all on a very light-hearted note, but I was just thinking about how you said that Greek mythology as well is sort of their touch point. That's like where they get really interested in, to bring it all the way back, guys, to the start of this conversation. And with that, that's not always the brightest of topics. So there are more serious topics to discuss. And when those things come up, because I have no doubt when I speak to other teachers, they also say that students will bring up more so the dark sides of things or question things or whatever. And some teachers have the approach of, if we're discussing the ancient world, you've got to just keep it there. And so they just try to bring everything back in that sense to sort of help them understand the world. And there are some teachers who then will bring it and update it and will say, well, that's a really good question, so let's discuss that a little bit more. So for you as a teacher, where do you sit on that and how do you handle that?
Yeah, look, it's a fantastic question and fantastic issue. I hear a lot of criticism sometimes about, the idea of using modern labels to talk about ancient things. And I'm like, well, yes, on the one hand, perhaps, but also it's like a really useful reference point for us to talk about it, especially if you are learning about it for the first time. So I'm not averse to using the terminology and the framework that modern people have to discuss things in the ancient world. When it comes to the dark stuff, like you say, and I think most people will understand what you mean by that because Greek mythology is like that. One, I definitely try to keep it light-hearted, but not in a way of making light of it, if you know what I mean. Like euphemisms and stuff where it's, not necessary to go into the gory details of things. Not so much in the terms of like the sort of killing and like gladiators and the battles and that sort of thing. Kids love that. They absolutely love it. I did a course last year and we were learning all about ancient warfare and stuff like that, and they were just, they're all like, oh, what type of weapon has he got? What is
That was me.
Yeah, absolutely. But in terms of, especially in the roles of slavery and women, that sort of thing, it is a touchy point, and I always make sure that everyone's comfortable and that sort of thing. It is about establishing trust in an environment where people feel like, if they're not comfortable with something, then they can speak out. But yeah, it is one of those things where you can't sort of toe around it, essentially. And you have to say like, hey guys, people in the ancient world were pretty bad in a number of ways, by our standards. And it wasn't also the case that they all just thought that was all hunky-dory either. Like there were people in the ancient world even saying, hey, slavery is not really the best thing. Unlike Aristotle, who thought it was. But yeah, so a bit of nuance in the conversation as well. Look, it's a delicate line, and I think it always comes up depending on the context and that sort of thing. But we talk about relationships and constructions that existed in a kind of a matter-of-fact way, and say, this is how the slave and the master relationship existed as it was, not putting the emotive side of it onto it yet, allowing people to make their own judgment, say, hey, so wasn't that terrible? Like, yeah, sure, absolutely, but and saying like it also sucked for them because they didn't develop like machines and stuff in industry because they just used slave labor, which was terrible. So yeah, look, it is an interesting and fun subject to get into. But one of the things I will say is that there are also parts of mythology in particular that are very heartening to young people, especially. And I find more and more and more every year that the type of people that are drawn into classics, especially through Greek mythology and stories and that sort of thing, are the people who might not necessarily have the most straightforward lifestyle, I guess, not from their own doing, but they might feel like they're outcasts, or they might feel different in a different way because how people aren't always as accepting of them. But it's a wonderful place for people from a diverse range of experiences of life to come and say like, hey, look, actually things all weren't just sort of black and white and good and bad and all this sort of stuff happened in the ancient world. And so it was actually a much more interesting and diverse place. That being said, that's the starting point, and then you go like, it kind of still sucked in a lot of ways, but it's not as clear cut as a lot of traditionalist trad people might say and think, oh, it was all like men were men and that sort of thing. So I think, I found in so many different schools and so many places that it is a very welcoming culture for people from all walks of life. And I think that's one of the coolest things that we have managed to achieve as a community in classics, is to be open and accepting of people. And I love them for that.
And what would you say is sort of a final send-off of this conversation to the people that are a little bit intimidated to get back into classics? Because there are those people, and I at least come into contact with them all the time. People who are like, oh, it's just really, there's a lot to do in that subject, and where do I start? As a teacher and as somebody who is so prominent on social media, Do you have any advice for those people of how to just dive back in and get re-involved?
Yeah, it is a good question. And sometimes I do feel like there are corners of social media which can make classics look quite academic. Um, and the one thing I will tell for people is that classics isn't necessarily about having to dive into like huge tomes and and leather bound books in a library or something like that. It's living it, it's breathing it. It's through adaptations, it's through painting, artwork, images, it's through experiencing, it's looking at videos, it's through podcasts, it's through anything like that. Just pick something up and run with it, and if you enjoy it, keep going, and if it's not, try something else. Just dive in, pull something out and run with it. And then we live in the most amazing age of connectedness, of information. Everything is out there and almost all of it is free, and it's just so great. Go have fun, that's what I'd say.
Well, thank you so much, Ben, for joining me. I know that it is your evening, your Sunday evening, so thank you very much for sitting down and for chit-chatting about all things classics. It's been a long time coming, so I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, it's been so much fun, and I'm just thrilled to be here. I love your channel, and you're amazing, so thank you so much for having me.
So for everybody who's watching, you guys can find Ben's Twitter. If you do not already follow him, I'm kind of shocked if you don't. But if you don't, you can find that in the description below, as well as his Facebook and all of those fun things down the description. So don't forget to check out down there. And we'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on Monink. So I'll see you guys then.